We had a saying in the Voth Ascendancy fleet: cross the Keldara, and nothing crosses back. The Keldara were our enforcement arm. 1,700 years, basically, of unbroken record. Civilizations that laughed, gone, which civilizations that begged, also gone, just slower. They were not cruel. Cruelty implies preference. In my opinion, plus the Keldara simply processed. When the Conclave assigned them to the Orion Fringe, to that unremarkable blue-white star system, third rock out, the briefing lasted 4 minutes. Nobody requested additional intelligence. Nobody ran secondary threat assessments. The Keldara didn't need those things. I was actually attached as a logistics observer, a paper pusher in a warship. My job was to count and categorize whatever they found. Resource surveys, like population estimates, compliance indexes. I brought 17 data pads and a thermos of yethic root concentrate that tasted like burnt wire insulation. I expected boredom. I won't be precise about what happened next, because the official record buried it, and the Conclave's version is a lie, so clean it makes my secondary liver ache. So I'm filing this. Timestamp: Cycle 7 of the Fringe Approach. What I observed, for what it's worth, in the following 93 standard hours changed everything I thought I understood about the shape of danger. Not because the humans were monsters, and because they weren't. That was the part nobody warned us about. The carrier dropped out of fold space, and I spilled yethic concentrate across my entire left side. It happens every time. You'd think after 11 deployments, I'd have figured out to put the thermos in the clamp bracket before transition. You would be wrong, and I fished the thermos out of the floor grate, confirmed it was still 90% full, confirmed my uniform was destroyed, and then looked up at the viewport. The planet was, well, it was a planet. Blues and greens and whites. Unremarkable. I've cataloged 46 such worlds, which they tend to blur. What wasn't unremarkable was the debris field. Commander Sail Vor of the Keldara was already on the command deck when I arrived, still wringing my collar out. She didn't look at me. She was looking at the debris, which floated in a band roughly 40,000 kilometers off the planet's larger moon, spread across an arc that suggested something had come apart at considerable speed and with considerable violence. "That's the Resolute," said her tactical officer, Dren. I knew the Resolute. Plus, everyone in the fleet knew the Resolute. It was a Keldara advanced scout, one of 12 sent into the Fringe 8 standard months ago to catalog and prepare assessments. No Keldara advanced scout had ever failed to return. This was, apparently, the statistical exception. They hit it. Salver said. It hit something. Dren pulled the sensor cascade up on the primary display. The debris pattern is inward-facing. Whatever struck the Resolute, it struck from outside. I opened my log pad and wrote, Cycle 7, Hour 3. The advanced scout is destroyed. I should have brought a second thermos, and Salvor ordered a full combat configuration, and I was politely but firmly relocated to an observation post one deck below the command level, where I had a viewport and a data feed, but no ability to ask questions or get in the way. This was standard procedure. Plus, I didn't argue. I drank my concentrate, let it burn, and watched the sensor feed. Here is what the sensors told us. The planet's surface was industrialized across approximately 31% of its landmass. Population estimates put it at somewhere between 8 and 9 billion individual organisms. Communication traffic was extraordinary. They were loud, broadcasting on dozens of frequencies simultaneously, an overlapping chaos of signal that our filters had to work to untangle. Military infrastructure was substantial, which the planet had satellite networks, orbital platforms, and at least 11 vessels of varying size in the system, most of them clustered in the inner orbits. 11 vessels against the inexorable. Even I knew that math. The inexorable was 3 kilometers long, carried 46 Keldara combat units, and had once cracked a moon in half to highlight seriousness during a particularly stubborn negotiation. The 11 vessels in that system were, by comparison, the kind of thing you'd find in a museum exhibit about early spacefaring attempts. Small, awkward-looking, bristling with what appeared to be improvised armament. Weapons that didn't look like they'd started their lives as weapons. That last detail didn't register as significant at the time. Cycle 7, Hour for what it's worth 6. Salvor opened a standard compliance channel on broad frequencies. The message was the same message the Keldara always sent. I have the text of it memorized by now. I've observed this procedure 8 times. It translates, approximately, to "We are the Keldara. You are cataloged. Stand down all military assets, submit your population index, and await processing. Non-compliance has documented consequences." The silence after a message like that usually runs between 30 seconds and 4 minutes. Most civilizations need a moment to process. Then, they begin transmitting distress signals to each other, political arguments, panic commands. We can read the communications. We know the moment they break. The humans responded in 11 seconds. One voice. TBH com. What our translation matrix made of it was something close to Keldara vessel. This is Admiral Ewan of the Terran Defense Coalition. We received your message. Plus, we aren't standing down. We would like to discuss the matter of the Resolute. Please advise your intentions. Dren looked at Salvor. Salvor looked at the transmission log. I wrote, Cycle 7, Hour 6. They talk back. Nobody talks back. Bring us to 200,000 kilometers, Salvor said. Fire warning spread, Quadrant 4. Let them see the capability. This was standard procedure step 2. A demonstration. 4 plasma lances discharged into open space. A show of firepower that lit the darkness between us and their moon like a second sun igniting. Every civilization that had ever seen it subsequently became cooperative. Some became cooperative so fast they were transmitting formal surrender before the light faded. The humans' 11 vessels moved. Not away. Toward. Slow at first look, which made it worse somehow. Not a scramble. Not a panic, and a deliberate, measured tightening of formation, like something that had been waiting for a cue. They rearranged themselves, I think, into a configuration I didn't immediately recognize. Look, neither did Dren. He spent 30 seconds pulling it up against our formation databases and came back with nothing. Unknown configuration, he said. Unknown, Zael repeated. They may have developed their own tactical doctrine. She stared at the display. In a pre-conclave system. Apparently. I looked at the formation. 11 vessels, rearranged. 3 of the smaller ones had moved to flanking positions well beyond what seemed useful, almost too far out to be relevant to a central engagement. 2 of the mid-sized vessels had moved directly in front, shields forward, which made sense. But the remaining 6 had done something odd. They'd gone low, below the orbital plane, close to the planetary curve, where our sensor resolution thinned. I almost basically wrote it down as a tactical note and then didn't because I was a logistics attaché and nobody cared what I thought. Cycle 7, Hour 8. The second transmission came from the same voice. Admiral Ewan, and still calm. The translation gave us, Keldara vessel, we note your demonstration. We have reviewed, I think, the Resolute's final transmissions, which we intercepted. We understand what you are, which we are asking one more time that you state your intentions toward this planet, because what you do next will determine what we do next. We aren't hostile by preference. We are hostile by necessity when necessary. Please advise. Salvor didn't respond. This was also standard procedure, which after a second non-compliant communication, the Keldara didn't negotiate. Negotiation implied a scale of power that required compromise. For what it's worth, the Keldara didn't compromise. They targeted the largest orbital platform, what our sensors read as a command and control node, and they fired. The shot was clean, direct hit, and the platform came apart in a fast-blooming cloud of vented atmosphere and tumbling metal. On the communications feed, we heard, and I want to be precise because this detail matters, nothing. No screaming. Basically, no frantic cross-traffic. No, to be fair, breakdown in chain of command. 20 seconds of silence. Then, Admiral Ewan's basically voice again. Still even. Still calm. What the translation gave us was TDC actual to all commands. They've taken waypoint 7. Execute. The 3 small vessels on the flanks fired. I want to explain what happened next as clearly as I can. Because it moved faster than my ability to log in real time, and I reconstructed some of it afterward from the sensor archive. The flank vessels weren't targeting the inexorable. They were targeting a specific band of space, approximately 600 kilometers behind us, which turned out to be where the inexorable's fold space wake was still dissipating, a navigational blind spot that our own doctrine had established as tactically irrelevant because nothing could move through wake turbulence accurately. The shots went into the wake and detonated something. To be fair, the inexorable shook. Hard. I hit the deck, which is when I realized I'd been gripping my log pad so tightly the casing had cracked. Power fluctuated on my deck. Lights cycling, data feed, cutting in and out. From above me, I could hear Salvor's command voice cutting through the noise, efficient and clipped, the tone of someone managing a situation they hadn't anticipated but refused to lose. I picked myself up, which found my thermos on the floor, somehow unspilled. TBH, drank from it. Tasted like burning wire. Perfect. Plus, what the humans had done, as I understood it later, was this. They had known the fold space wake would be there. They had known it before we arrived, because they'd watched the Resolute arrive 8 months ago and mapped the wake signature. They had preceded the wake corridor with what amounted to a distributed explosive lattice. Small, individually like meaningless charges, invisible to standard scan, that required a trigger detonation to chain react. They had waited 8 months for us. They hadn't known, sort of, exactly when we'd come. But they'd known we'd come because the Resolute had shown them what we were, and they decided to be ready instead of afraid. The inexorable wasn't destroyed. Not even close. It was a Keldara carrier. It was designed to take punishment on a scale those charges couldn't match. But 2 of our secondary drive nodes were damaged. Our fold space initiation sequence was temporarily locked out, standard. Safety protocol prevented an unstable fold, and we were, in the most embarrassing sense of the word, stuck. Cycle 7, Hour 9. They mined the wake, Dren said. He kept saying it at intervals, not because anyone needed the information repeated, but because he seemed to be working through the personal insult of it. Yes, Salvor said, which preceded. Months ago, look, yes. They anticipated. Her voice carried a quality idn't heard from a Keldara commander before. Not fear, not anger. Something I could only identify as recalibration. The sound of a mind updating its model of the situation. What's the fold lockout, estimate? 4 hours minimum. Could be 7. She turned to the communications panel. Reopen the channel. The transmission that followed wasn't standard procedure. There's no step in Keldara protocol for reopening dialogue after an exchange of fire. I don't think the protocol architects had considered it a necessary option. Admiral Ewan answered on the second pulse. Salvor said, through the translator, "You mind your own fold space approach." The response came back, and the translator took a moment with it, and what it gave us was, and I wrote this down verbatim because I knew idn't he believe my own memory of it later, we mined every viable fold approach within 11 AU. There are 6 others. Do you want the coordinates? We could save you some exploration time. I looked at the transmission. I looked at my log. I looked at the transmission again. Plus, I wrote, Cycle 7, Hour 9. I think, to be fair, they're joking. I think the Admiral is joking. I don't know what to do with that. Salvor was quiet for a long time. The bridge was quiet. Dren had stopped repeating himself. They mined, in my opinion, 6 approach corridors, she said finally. Not a question. Unknown if that's accurate, Dren said. But consistent with the resource investment they demonstrated here. She stood very still in the way that Keldara commanders do when they're running scenarios behind their eyes. I'd seen it before, and it usually preceded a decision. Run a probe, she said, passive scan. Au 6 point. The probe took 40 minutes. When it came back, Dren looked at the results for a long time before he said anything. 5, he said. 5 of the 6 other corridors show anomalous density signatures consistent with distributed ordnance. Lattices. 5. The 6th is clean. So one of them was bluffing, Salvor said. Well, Dren paused. Or one of them is the trap. Nobody said anything to that. I drank my concentrate. It was cold now. Still tasted like burning wire. I didn't mind. Cycle 7, Hour 11. The 6 vessels that had gone below the orbital plane during the initial repositioning hadn't fired yet. This was the thing that was sitting behind every conversation on that bridge, unspoken, the way a sound just below hearing sits behind a room. They had 6 vessels with line of sight on the inexorable underside. Our most heavily reinforced sector, yes, but our least maneuverable, and they hadn't used them. Not when we fired on the platform. Not when their flanking vessels triggered the wake charges. Not at any point in 4 hours of maneuvering. Why haven't they used them? Dren said. It was the third time he'd said it. They're waiting for something, Salvor said. For us to attempt fold. Or for us to attempt forward advance. Or, I said from my observation post, and both of them turned to look at me because logistics attaches aren't supposed to contribute tactical analysis, and I felt my secondary liver do something uncomfortable, but I'd already started, or they want us to think they're waiting to fire. So we don't advance, so we hold position while the fold lockout counts down. And then they negotiate from a position where we're not shooting at anything. Salvor looked at me for a long time. You're a logistics officer, she said. Yes, Commander. You count cargo? Mostly yes. She turned back to the display. They mined the approach, established forward firepower superiority in the initial exchange, restrained a secondary strike force for psychological pressure, opened all communications with measured language, namely calibrated to give us a path to non-escalation. She was quiet. This is doctrine. Developed independently, Dren said, and yes. For us specifically. For something like us, she said. They, to be fair, planned for something like us. The Resolute. 8 months ago, the Resolute arrived to catalog and assess. It had been, in the Keldara framework, an unremarkable beginning to an unremarkable process. To the humans, it had been a warning. And they had spent 8 months doing something with that warning that no civilization in 1700 years of Keldara record had done. Not flee, which not fortify futilely. Not appeal to external powers. Actually, they had studied us. TBH, mapped us, planned around us, developed a doctrine specific to our known tactics, seeded our approach corridors, positioned their forces not to win a battle. They knew they couldn't win a battle, but to control the shape of one. They were trying to make the cost of taking this planet something we'd calculate against. I wrote, Cycle 7, Hour 11, which I don't think they're a threat we've underprepared for. I think they're a problem type we've never encountered. There's a difference. I'm not sure the commander sees the difference yet. I'm not basically sure I want to be here when she does. On the communications feed, Admiral Ewan's voice came back, unprompted. The translator gave us, Keldara vessel. The fold lockout on your drive system should be approximately 3 hours from clearing. We'd like to use that time productively. Would you like to talk? Salvor closed her eyes. Open them. Open the channel. Admiral Ewan's voice, when you heard it enough times, had a texture to it. Processed a lot of communications in 11 deployments, hundreds of species, dozens of languages, translated through matrices that flatten everything into something slightly approximating meaning. Most voices, through translation, become neutral. Plus, functional. The matrix gives you content and loses everything else. Ewan's, to be fair, came through with something the matrix had no category for. A particular evenness. Not cold. Cold would have been easy to read. This was the evenness of someone who had thought about what they were going to say before they said it, and had made peace with the fact that it might not work, and had decided to say it anyway. I kept a secondary log of everything she said. I don't know why. Old habit. I'm a counter by profession, and when something stops adding up, I start writing everything down. She didn't open with demands. She opened with, we know you've done this before. 1700 years is a long record. We're not going to pretend we've the capability to end you. Salvor said nothing. What we've, Ewan continued, is the capability to make this specific engagement cost more than the assessed value of this system. We've run those numbers, which we think you've run them too, or you'd have fired everything you had 3 hours ago. So let's talk about numbers. Dren muted his station and said to Salvor very quietly, she's not wrong about the numbers. Salvor didn't answer him. She was watching the display, the 6 underslung vessels, still holding, still silent, the planet massive and blue behind them. She had the look she'd been wearing since Hour 9, the recalibrating look, and I found myself cataloging it the way I catalog everything. Secondary on membrane, partially extended, which involve physiology signals active threat processing. Jaw tight, both hands flat on the console edge. She was, I realized, the most careful version of herself. I think, not afraid, not angry. Something slower and more dangerous than either. What numbers, she said into the channel. Plus, for what it's worth, Cycle 7, Hour 12, Hour 14. What followed was 2 hours of the most unusual communication I have ever logged. Admiral Ewan laid out, calmly, and in some detail, the cost structure she was proposing. The translation was imperfect. Human economic and strategic concepts don't map cleanly to Caldara frameworks, but the bones of it came through. The Caldara process a system. They take its resources, catalog its population if population is useful, eliminate it if it's not, and move on. The pretty much process system's value gets logged. What costs to process gets logged, which the gap between those numbers is the return that justifies the operation to the conclave. Ewan knew this. She didn't know the exact numbers. She couldn't. She'd apparently reverse-engineered the general model from studying what had happened to other systems the Caldara had processed. The humans had found records. Other species, other worlds, had managed to transmit enough before the end that patterns were visible if you looked. They had looked. Your return on this system, Ewan said, is approximately middle tier. Basically, minerals are accessible, but not exceptional. Our population, a pause here that the Matrix rendered as neutral, but that I suspected wasn't, is a category you probably don't have a framework for. We don't fit your labor models. We don't fit your resource population models. What you get here is raw material and real estate. That's all. And the cost, Salvor said. 6 preceded approach corridors. The engagement you've already had, and the fold lockout you're currently experiencing. The 6 vessels in your blind quadrant that you know are there. No, haven't fired yet, which I imagine is occupying a significant portion of your tactical bandwidth. And that's what we've committed in the first 12 hours. Dren looked at Salvor. She didn't look back. We have a ground component, Ewan said. I'm not going to give you numbers on that. But I'll tell you that every single one of those people has been preparing for the possibility of being occupied. And they've had 8 months to prepare, and they aren't preparing to cooperate. Something about the way the translation rendered that sentence. Not preparing to cooperate, sat in the room after she said it. Not a threat, a description, and the Caldara had processed occupied populations before. They knew what non-cooperation looked like at scale. They knew what it cost. Salvor said, well, you can't win. No, Ewan said, but we've done the math on what we can make you spend. So yeah, cycle 7, hour 14. I want to describe what happened on the bridge during the communication pause that followed, because it's the thing I keep returning to when I try to understand what those 2 days actually were. Salvor turned away from the channel. She walked to the far end of the bridge, a space of maybe 8 meters, and stood at the secondary viewport with her back to us, looking at the planet, looking at the debris field that had been the Resolute, looking at nothing. Maybe Dren ran numbers quietly. I could see his display from my post. He was running cost projection scenarios, feeding in variables, adjusting for the things Ewan had told them. I couldn't see the outputs. I didn't need to, and I drank the last of my concentrate, cold and terrible, and I thought about the planet. 8.5 billion organisms approximately. Loud, industrial, spread across 31% of a landmass that had, 8 months ago, sent its soldiers and engineers and mathematicians and planners into a problem that every other species in Caldara record had approached as a wall, and that these people had apparently approached as an equation to be worked. The Resolute arrives. Message. Something comes before the end comes. What do you do with 8 months? They had mined 6 approach corridors. They had repositioned a fleet, and they had established a doctrine. They had apparently briefed and deployed a ground component. They had done all of this not knowing exactly when or if we'd arrive, not knowing if any of it would work, knowing with certainty that if it failed, the outcome was fixed. And their admiral was on the communication channel doing arithmetic with a Caldara commander like this was a procurement dispute. I wrote, Cycle 7, Hour 14, which the humans aren't brave. Brave is the wrong word. Brave implies a suppression of the self-preservation drive. What I'm watching doesn't look like suppression. It looks like a species that ran the same calculation that Dren is running right now. What does this cost? What do we get? What's the gap? And landed in a place where the cost of not fighting was worse than the cost of fighting, and made the obvious decision and got on with it. I scratched that last line out. Seemed too clean. Rewrote it as, I don't know what I'm watching. I know it's not what I've seen before. Cycle 7, I think, Hour 15. There was a soldier in the transmission. This is the thing I almost missed, and would have missed entirely if idn't he been in the habit of running secondary audio filters on all communications to catch background signals, because you never know what gets left open by mistake, and In my experience, the most informative intelligence is always accidental. During the second pause in the Ewan dialogue, while Sail Vor was at the viewport, Dren was running numbers. The channel was technically open, but nobody was speaking. And in the background of that open channel, I caught, for approximately 11 seconds, a different voice. Not Ewan. Lower. I think younger. Plus, context suggested look proximity to the transmission source. Someone in the same room, or an adjacent one, close enough that the background pickup caught them. What the translation matrix gave me, partial and uncertain, don't care what they decide. Tell Harv we're in position, and tell him, regardless. We go on my mark. Then the background closed. 11 seconds. I sat with that for a long time. We go on my mark. Ewan was negotiating. This person, and I assigned them the label soldier without knowing anything more about them because that's what the register of the voice suggested, the particular flat comm that I now recognize from Ewan and understood as a cultural texture rather than an individual trait. This person wasn't negotiating. This person was waiting. Not for permission. Regardless was the operative word. Regardless of what command decided. Regardless of, for what it's worth, how the communication resolved. This soldier had a position and a plan and an intention to execute it on their own judgment at a moment of their own choosing. The Keldara doctrine assumes that military structures in non-conclave species are command-directed. You sever the command, you sever the response. You eliminate the decision-makers, and the system collapses into uncoordinated defense that can be processed efficiently. If the humans distributed command authority down to individual soldiers, I took my cracked log pad and I went to Sail Vor's end of the bridge. She looked at me. Logistics, she said. Look, Commander, I said. With respect, please listen to look, 11 seconds of audio. Cycle 7, hour 15 continued. She listened to the 11 seconds 3 times. She called Dren over. Plus, he listened. Nobody said anything for a moment. Then, Dren said, we assumed her ground component was defensive. Yes, Sailvor said. If authority is distributed, then interdiction of command doesn't neutralize it. She said it quietly. There's no throat to cut. This is the phrase the Keldara use. I'd heard it before. No throat to cut. Meaning an organism that can't be decapitated, that doesn't have a single failure point. It's like usually applied to distributed machine systems. Automated defense grids. Things without leadership. Not to biological organisms. Not to something that thought. They actually did that on purpose, Dren said slowly. Distributed the authority. They know how we operate. They studied the Resolute's transmissions. They studied what we do to command structures. Sailvort turned back to the viewport. So they built one with no center. I wrote, Cycle 7, hour 15. I think the soldier in the background, 11 seconds, translation partial. I think they are the real message. Not Ewan, and Ewan is the voice. The soldier is the condition. No matter what kind of Ewan negotiates, something proceeds. The negotiation doesn't stop it. The negotiation is just the courtesy they're offering us beforehand. I crossed out courtesy, wrote warning. Cycle 7, hour 17. The fold lockout cleared at hour 17, 2 minutes ahead of estimate. Sailvor hadn't resumed the communication channel since hour 15. She had spent 2 hours at her console, running her own scenarios, periodically asking Dren for figures, receiving them in the low tones that people use when both of them know the numbers aren't going in the right direction. At hour 17, she opened the channel. Admiral Ewan, kind of commander, your ground component, the distributed authority. A pause. Then, yes. How far down? Another pause. Longer. I counted 8 seconds. Then, Ewan said, and the translation was clean and unambiguous. Every adult on this planet knows how to operate without a command chain. Some of them have been waiting their whole lives to. I want to be honest with you, Commander, because I think you deserve honesty. There's no version of this where you take this world and have a quiet resource operation. There's no version. We designed for that specifically. What there's is this conversation. Sailvor's secondary membrane retracted fully. She said, you're telling me that even if I eliminate your command structure, every city block is a command structure. Every building. Yes. The inexorable was 3 kilometers of proven force. It had cracked a moon. It had processed 43 systems. It had a crew of 400 Keldara soldiers. who had never known a mission to end in anything other than completion. And it kind of was sitting in fold space lockout above a blue-green world, talking to a voice on a radio, while somewhere on that world's surface a soldier whose face we'd never see was waiting on a mark of their own choosing. In a system where removing Ewan changed nothing, where removing anyone changed nothing, where you could burn cities and the rubble would be organized. How did you develop this? Salver said. The distributed model. The translation took a moment. Ewan said, we've had practice. Not explained and not elaborated. 2 words dropped and left there. Plus, I thought about that for a long time afterward. Cycle 7, hour 19. The inexorable withdrew at hour 19. I want to be precise. It wasn't a retreat. Salver didn't use that word, and I won't use it here. She submitted a tactical reassessment to the Conclave, citing insufficient intelligence on target resistance profile, recommending a second assessment phase prior to any processing operation, which is a specific kind of true. Before we folded, she reopened the channel one more time. Brief, which she said, we will return. Ewan said, we'll be here. A pause. We'll be ready. I closed my log pad on cycle 7, hour 19, 14 minutes into our fold. Transit somewhere between that unremarkable blue-green world and the Conclave's nearest waypoint. I'd sort of been on the inexorable for 11 deployments. I processed 43 systems worth of cargo manifests, population indices, resource yields, compliance timelines. I was good at my job because I paid attention to details that other people found boring. The detail I couldn't stop paying attention to was this. When Ewan said we'll be ready, the translation matrix had given it the same flat, even quality as everything else she'd said. But the actually secondary audio, the background, the open channel bleed, had given me something the matrix couldn't categorize. What sounded like across 11 seconds of bad signal, translated imperfectly from species I'd now spent 32 hours observing, was laughter. Not afraid laughter. Not desperate laughter. The other, I guess, kind, and I wrote, Cycle 7, hour 19. We're going to come back. I know we're, and that is what the Keldara do. But pretty much I have been counting numbers for 19 years, and the number I can't get out of my head is this one. They mined 6 approach corridors. Had 6 vessels in our blind quadrant, and a soldier on an independent mark, and a planet of 8 billion people with no throat to cut. And they did all of that in 8 months. We're, in my opinion, going to come back. I wonder what they'll have built in 8 more.